Hey, so hi, I'm James. In my day job, I'm one of the co-founders of Movement. I'm with my colleague in Movement, Rich, for the last few months been working on this project. We've kind of codenamed it Council Gateway, basically because we couldn't find a more imaginative name. But the challenge, you might recognise our friend Jackie Weaver, who recently had a line named after her on the London Overground. There are 400 councils at the kind of local authority level across the country, and obviously many, many more at the kind of lower levels. And you know, this is actually like thousands and thousands of elected representatives. And they're actually, you know, they're going about, they're doing lots of things, they're having meetings, they're making decisions. They're deciding budgets for our local services and making decisions on licensing, planning, all of these sorts of things. But actually, there isn't a huge amount of visibility into kind of like what they're doing. Like they do actually have to publish quite a few things, but actually trying to find that and being aware of it, unless you're quite a determined sort of researcher or someone who takes a very keen interest in this, is not that easy. And that's a shame because there's actually tons and tons of opportunities for ways to use this data. And so when Campaign Lab sort of put together the challenge, it was formulated around sort of campaigning on the doorstep. So if you're a local candidate and you want to sort of like talk about local issues, finding out what the local council has been doing, decisions they've been making. If it's the other party that's in control, decisions that you don't agree with, you don't think the residents will agree with, could be really fertile territory. But there's actually tons of other uses, so single issue campaigns, being able to find out what's going on in councils across the country that are making, you know, sort of lots of relatively small decisions that add up to a sort of, you know, nationwide shift in policy. Could be very useful to find contentious decisions more generally. Things that could indicate corruption or sort of undue influence in how procurement is being done, local news, and you know probably lots of other things that we haven't thought of in here. So this is all well and good. And we're like, great, let's get to it. Unfortunately, the issue with this is that actually there's tons and tons and tons of data that councils are producing. So I mean, this is probably an underestimate, because this is actually just based on kind of what we've been able to gather. But yeah, so we're talking thousands and thousands of documents. That's like 2 million words every week that is sort of being published, and you know, sort of long documents about planning, etc., etc. I looked it up, and that's apparently 3 times the length of the Bible every week. So lots of content. I forgot what the next slide is. Yeah, this is just another way to visualize it. So this is all of the councils in the country. The grey area represents the data over the last year, and the green area represents what we've scraped so far. And that already is adding up to like 20 million words or something like that, so a big chunk there. So yeah, we thought we'd get to it. So we started putting together a bit of a pipeline to kind of like collect all this data. So the first challenge you can imagine is that there are about 400 councils, all with different websites, and you thought, wow, this is going to be a real challenge to try and write an individual scraper for each one of these. Very luckily for us, we discovered quite early on that about 80% of the councils are using the same piece of software to run their websites. Which meant that once you'd figured out the URL of their website, you could then infer all of the other sort of paths that you needed to kind of look up. So basically, yeah, we've got 80% of those, and we're just not worrying about the other 20% for the moment until we kind of like crack the case with the 80%. But yeah, so we've got a scraper running, Ruby on Rails, which is, that's what we're familiar with. So we set up a little app that kind of periodically goes through and sort of finds the top level of the website and then sort of dives down into the pages below it, and then sort of like keeps following the links until it kind of reaches a sort of dead end. And then it makes a big list of PDFs, and it downloads all of those, and it can, from the pages that it appears on, it can know what committees and sort of when the meeting happened and all that kind of stuff. So we then just use a piece of software called PDF Reader, imaginative name, to pull out the text. And then this is the kind of like the more interesting bit. And I think as Ricky was saying actually in the presentation before, a year ago this would have been, essentially I would have considered an insurmountable challenge. But actually now, because you can essentially just send huge volumes of text at ChatGPT and say, tell me things about this, and you can do that at scale. Actually, it makes it possible to do this kind of step down here of like summarizing. So every document that goes in gets a summary that kind of like, I won't go into the details of the prompt, but it'll tell you like a top line. It says, are there any contentious items within it? What are the key decisions that have been made? All that kind of stuff. And allows you to sort of look at a 50-page document and get a kind of quick summary. The other thing that we do when we get the PDF is it goes into a thing called OpenSearch, which is sort of like a open source piece of software that is for searching huge volumes of text data. So you can essentially do keyword search. I'm just going to move this out of the way, across over here. And then within those two things lead into, we've got two main interfaces. So there's a kind of explore interface where you can click around and go into different councils, different meetings, different committees and see summaries of what's going on, and a search interface where you can essentially just type in queries and see what happens there. I will, so this is what I've already said, so I'm not going to repeat this slide. So this is an example of the interface for like looking at council, so you kind of get like, a summary of what's going on, and then a sort of timeline, and then you can click into each of the individual meetings and decisions to kind of get like, the ChatGPT summary. And then you can click through and get the actual documents if you are so interested. Yes, that's a good move. Just move like that, lovely. This is an example of the search results. So you can see here that I have put in the word Fujitsu. So I was like, it'd be interesting to look at procurement things. You can see it. This is searching, I think there's about 70,000 documents, because we've only indexed the last 6 weeks so far. But you can see, it's like pulling out these mentions of Fujitsu. You can also use longer phrases, or kind of whatever you want, and you can also filter it down to the individual council level if you're kind of doing a deeper dive there. This was just an example of another potential single issue type thing that you might want to kind of like search for. If there's particular companies or particular issues, this could be very useful. And then unfortunately my colleague deleted the page that showed this in a nice sort of visual way. So instead I've pasted in this lump of JSON. But this is an example of kind of like summarizing a document and with OpenAI and the sort of structured data that comes out. So I think again, as Ricky was saying, like it is incredibly useful that it can take like a huge unstructured piece of content and output in a very predictable format that can then just be rendered on a web page or analyzed further. What next? A lot of this has been sort of mashed together in a bit of a hurry. So we kind of, our next objective really is just to get it to a point where, people can use it a bit, and probably just be able to do like the kind of text searching and sort of like have a look around. So we think that's how we'll get the kind of best feedback. After that, we've got a whole variety of ideas, but I think a lot will be informed kind of by how people use it and what they tell us will be interesting. So, setting up alerts for keywords like you do for Google Alerts, being able to have a particular sort of like issue that you're getting emails about. Semantic search, what I showed you before is just like keywords, so you'd have to find the exact mention of like a word or a set of words. Semantic search is basically, kind of you put all the documents into ChatGPT and it puts out, sticks a set of numbers that come out, and then when you search, that also turns it into a set of numbers, and then you kind of like find ones that are similar, and that allows it to search by similar meaning rather than just literal keywords. So if you were looking for things around climate bonds, it could be like something to do with like, sort of, I can't think of a paraphrase of it, but something that sort of means something similar. Then there's also something related that would be quite cool, that if you've got like a really specific thing you want to search for, basically being able to create like a custom sort of like OpenAI crawler, that you say, oh, I want to find anything that is like, fits this kind of thing, and then it would go through all of the documents and kind of like say, ChatGPT, can you see anything that looks like this? Please send it back, which might be a bit like deeper than just doing a semantic search. Also looking at entity recognition, so being able to find people or private companies or other things that recur, and then being able to have pages for those. So you could say, if a new councillor is elected or if a councillor is standing to be an MP, let's like find all the stuff that they've said, all the decisions they've been involved in, who knows what will turn up there. Also just improving the scraper. As we've got into the weeds with the software, I've realised actually there's some things we can scrape better. There's the 20% of councils, I'm very sorry about that. There's the 20% of councils that we haven't been able to scrape, and there's also stuff like loads and loads of councils record meetings and put them on YouTube, and obviously you've got potential there for transcribing and getting even more like kind of data about what was discussed, what was said, who said it, that kind of stuff, which could be very useful for searching. So I think the overall objective is to not sort of decide too much about like how it's used, but just kind of create a bit of a resource that can sort of be used in different ways. Any ideas would be very welcome. So what was supposed to happen on this slide was that it would have a link to the GitHub page, because this is kind of freely available open source, so anyone can go and have a look at it and use it if they want, but that's not there, so we'll have to share it afterwards. But thank you.
Any questions for James on council minutes?
Hi there. Thanks, James. That's really interesting. I saw there was on the sample page of code you had, there was a thing about contentiousness, like contentiousness score. How are you doing that?
So the prompt is, so the general prompt for this is like, it asks a question and then it basically provides like a sample data structure and says like, please return it like this, and some sample like JSON. I think for the contentiousness, it sort of gives an example of a very uncontentious thing and an example of a very contentious thing. But obviously, I think we found that some of these, like, it's too big an ask to pass, 100-page documents on topics of all varieties. So I think that's why we kind of came up with the idea of like being able to sort of do a more deep query that you then apply to every document when you're sort of looking for things. You sort of say like, oh, I want to find like all kind of examples of councillors speaking out against low traffic neighbourhoods or something like that, and that might sort of It works sometimes. To be fair, it gave it like a score out of like 0 to 10, and there was some stuff that was coming up, 8 or 9, that was like, that does seem like, it does seem like they've lost £20 million. That seems pretty bad. It's not useless, but it's not perfect either.
Any other questions? Oh, we've got at the back. So, Mo, do you want to go first?
This is awesome. 2 quick questions. One, will you be able to search historical council meetings? And 2, like in a use case, if there was a local group of Tower Hamlets that suspected that a council had been corrupt in its work with a developer, would they be able to go in and search that developer and find a history of when that developer was mentioned at what meetings?
Yes, so to both of those, so the historical data, we've only gone back sort of 6 weeks so far, but there's at least years kind of on there. I think I found a document from 1999 in one of the things. I think at some point the more recent ones are usually sort of easy to pass the text. At some point you'll get scans, which then obviously are more of a pain to scan, but yes. And then yeah, in terms of searching a developer, you could go to that council filter and then sort of put in that name and find all mentions of the developer's company or something like that.
So when will we be able to use it?
Next week or two, I think we'll have kind of like the thing ready. I mean, it's going to be a work in progress, but we'll kind of like share it around and ask for feedback.
Brill, another question there?
It's great. Maybe my question is more like Govern Hub more than Campaign Hub, but I guess for a lot of politicians, or people who support politicians, who are kind of the generalists, they've got a lot of different issues to cover. I can imagine this tool could be very helpful to them in also simplifying the things that are changed that are most salient from, as a issue or policy move through stages or development move through stages. If you can see how people could use it to help them see the important details of change that might be written by an official, they wouldn't necessarily pick up on their own.
Yeah, I think even just providing a database that then either further analysis can be done on, I think, or just can pull out all the paragraphs over time that have mentioned a certain thing.
The opportunities
I-
are endless.
I think we want to hear use cases, because I think we came at it from one kind of angle of finding kind of contentious stuff to mention on the doorstep, but actually there's so many other use cases that it could be adapted to.
We have another question over here.
Thank you. How do you think it does with council budgets?
Someone else mentioned that earlier, actually. It's surprisingly the tables that appear in the PDFs. It does a surprisingly good job of parsing those out. I've not really tried searching them specifically. Do you have an example of what sort of thing you'd look for?
I would say being able to look at periods of a lot of overspend or underspend and bringing those out.
Yeah, I think that might be the kind of thing where we need to add a custom prompt that sort of says, if it's a budget. We've also thought about this two-stage pipeline where we use ChatGPT to do a kind of shallow sort of categorization of all of the things, and then if it says, it's a budget, then we put it into another model that then says, turn this into a table and mark up overspend, underspend, that kind of stuff. Could potentially be done.
Brill, any other questions? Michael?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as a way to deal with all the unstructured data. I was wondering if there's any councils that do it in a structured way. Are there any councils that use any actual data standards to publish their minutes or their motions or anything?
Well, so the software that I think it's called Modern Garden. I think it's provided by Civica, who sort of provide a lot of local government software. It does part of the reason we've been able to pass so much of this so quickly is because it does have a sort of standardised format, and there are things decisions that are made by the council are output into a feed, all of the councillors listed, there's even registers of interest, that kind of stuff. So that has made it a lot easier. I think in terms of API, obviously it would be lovely if they would just provide an API so we didn't have to scrape all of this. I imagine that's not in their interests, but who knows, if anyone knows anyone who works on that project.
Cool. Any other questions? Oh, James.
It's not really a question, just to say that in the last few months I've been speaking to quite a lot about local public interest news journalists and stuff, local people running local papers, investigating local decisions and all this kind of stuff. That's massively deteriorated in the last 20 years for obvious reasons. And something like this would be so critical to the work they're doing. This is really, really